My name is Cassie Brownell, and I'm an assistant professor here in the Language and Literacies Education program within the Curriculum Teaching and Learning department. I'm in my first year here at OISE, and I've really enjoyed the chance to get to know the different faculty and students here during my time here. Most of my work that I do really can be categorized as early childhood or elementary literacies work, primarily in classrooms with young children and their teachers. The work that I do is something that I always aim to amplify the voices of young children and learners, often because in teacher education, we forget about the bodies in the class that are not at the front of the room. Much of the work that I do with young children involves both print-based writing, traditional with paper and pencils, as well as computers, fingers on keys. But I also ask children to create and tell stories through stop-motion animation, using different tablets and tools such as that, more digital type tools, as well as Legos, craft materials, and lots of different things in that regard. At the same time, I also have another kind of vein of interest in addition to teacher education, and then this work with early childhood literacies that really stems from some interest in sound studies, which is a very interdisciplinary field. So asking both children and teachers and adults to really listen for and to difference in a variety of different ways, and thinking about ambient soundscapes such as the rumble of the subway, which we often hear in our building here at OISE, to the passing of sirens, to the sound of a vent or the clock ticking. So how those can tell us different stories about community and how we might understand ourselves through those sorts of sounds. So one of the projects that I'm still in the process of writing up at the moment is really stems from some of the work that I did while I was in Michigan, where I was able to work at a school for about 4 years in a research partnership. And in the last year that I was there, it was the year of the 2016 presidential election in the US, which was quite tumultuous, both when it was happening and in the time that followed. The school itself was populated by a number of students from a variety of different backgrounds, both linguistically and racially, and representing a number of different groups, though the teachers are predominantly white. And so for the teachers that I was working with, one was very adamant that she wanted to create a space for children to be able to talk about the kinds of issues they were concerned about, including the proposed border wall with Mexico, as well as, at the time, the hashtag Muslim ban that was the fifth executive order of the GOP administration. And so what we did is together we collaboratively planned out a unit, both concerning different read alouds that she could do with the children in their morning meeting to have discussions to kind of prompt their understanding about what the topic would be for that day, as well as really developing a persuasive writing unit together. And that unit really concluded with the children writing letters to their representatives, both in Congress and across Congress, both in the Senate and the House of Representatives. And in these letters, all but one child really wrote about their opposition to these measures of immigration, having done a lot of work to really understand why it is that people migrate or immigrants from other places, what drives them to do that, both in terms of like the social factors, the economic factors, and so on. What happened after they wrote the letters, though, was that we really provided them an afternoon where they could just really engage with a lot of different materials, from Legos and craft supplies to different sorts of digital tablets, working either collaboratively or independently to retell their story or to really cast their argument in a new way. And so for a number of children, particularly those who were seen as perhaps not meeting standardized measures of what it meant to be literate, they really had the chance to engage and become experts. So one child in particular, Jem, was a student who built a Lego wall and described why people were on both sides of this wall between Mexico and the US, including folks like Donald Trump and Hillary Clinton as people who were both for the wall and against the wall, talking about people trying to build the wall while others were trying to take it down. And Jem, as another child said, really served as an inspiration. Her Lego wall became a mentor text of sorts as others began to craft similar sorts of walls themselves. For other children, they took the opportunity to develop and innovate in new ways. So one child developed like a water filter cup that he thought would be necessary for people who were trying to cross the border between Mexico and the US, knowing that it's sort of a long journey, but at the same time knew that for folks in refugee camps, they spend a lot of time really standing in line for water or waiting for different sorts of everyday materials and supplies that many of us take for granted. And so he innovated by creating a water filter cup and really wanting to have that be something that could be a prototype and taken up and actually constructed in the world. And so for a number of these kids, they were really showing their expertise in a way that maybe that print-based letter didn't really account for. And they also showed a really rich and deep understanding and engagement with critical issues, which is something we often overlook in classrooms because we're concerned about engaging in ways that are not necessarily neutral. And I think that from the work that I was able to do, which I really framed in a critical literacies way with the young children that I learned alongside of, it's really evident that young kids are in the know about all of this and that we really don't need to shelter them, but really create space for them to engage in these ways. And literacies or social studies as humanities are really a terrific way to let them into those spaces. So since landing in Toronto, I've had to learn a lot about the city in terms of the vast neighborhoods and the different groups who have been here for a long time, as well as those who are perhaps relatively new to the community. And being here at a time when there's also a lot of political change, both within the province and across different provinces here in Canada, there's some marked similarities to things that I saw happening in the US. And so one of the things that I'm hoping to really do is engage with schools here and engage with teachers here on a small level, probably an individual classroom or two, and really engage young learners in the same sorts of practices that I was able to do through my previous work when I was in Michigan. And so working with young kids to talk about some of the issues that are really pressing here. So things like the response to how we talk about and engage Indigenous histories in our classrooms, as well as issues around climate change, as well as similar things to the US in terms of like immigration and what does it mean for our cities to be changing in ways that perhaps not everyone is excited about. And how do young kids take up different identities and explore their communicative practices in different ways to really make their voices heard? Often because when we talk about policy, we don't hear from children until they have protests like they did recently with the sex ed curriculum, or even in some of the most recent changes that have been put forward by the provincial leaders in terms of changes they want to make to class sizes. And so helping to see that even the youngest of learners among us, those who are 6, 7, 8 years old or even younger, really do have voices and they have opinions and that they can understand seemingly complex issues and communicate their thoughts in sophisticated and complex ways that adults really need to pay attention to. In terms of where I really see the field going, or the types of things that I would encourage other young and emerging scholars to really consider in their work, I think that some of the things that I find most exciting are ideas around methods and the ways that we're both generating data as well as considering how we analyze it. So I think it's okay to step outside of what you might see as a checklist in terms of doing interviews in one particular way or capturing video in one particular way, and to try something different. So if that's taking up GoPros or tablets or handing cameras to your participants themselves, I found that to be incredibly fruitful and really pushing my own thinking in terms of the work that I'm doing and thinking about the questions that I'm curious about. So learning how to hand over a camera to a young child or strap a GoPro on them or myself to really think about the different ways that data can be generated using a lot of different digital tools, and then having the patience to really sit down and layer those kinds of things together through a process of analysis. In terms of the kinds of theories and things, I think one thing I would say is that it's really important to know who you are as a researcher, and that might mean playing around with methods, but also playing around with different theories. To read something that really excites you and invigorates you, and being okay with trying it, even if it's something others aren't doing in the building where you're situated. But to know and find a community of scholars beyond the walls of OISE or your program area to really think critically about the theories you're using and how you see them pushing forward the field that you're in new and different sorts of ways.